Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a todos y todas a este seminario de web organizado por el Venezuela Solidarity Network y la Alianza para la Justicia Global. We are here at today's monthly picket action and webinar organized by the Venezuela Solidarity Network and the Alliance for Global Justice. Before I go any further, we are going to activate the interpretation system. And in 1 second, you will see on your screen instructions for how to join the interpretation. El sistema de interpretación está activado en este momento porque este evento va a estar en la mayoría en español. Today's webinar will be in the majority in Spanish. To turn on simultaneous interpretation, you can find the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select your preferred language. Or if you're on a phone, you may have to select the 3 dots and more in order to find your preferred language. The mute original audio option will turn off the overlay of voices and provide clearer sound. Para activar la interpretación simultánea, busque el icono de globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom y seleccione su idioma preferido. Si se conecta desde el móvil, necesita seleccionar más para encontrar el icono del globo. La opción silenciar el audio original desactivará la sobreposición de voces para un sonido más claro. Gracias. Welcome again, everyone, to the Venezuela Solidarity Network's monthly webinar and online picket, co-organized with the Alliance for Global Justice. My name is Alison Bodine. I'm the coordinator of Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice's Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, and want to acknowledge that I am speaking here from the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As we defend Venezuela's right to self-determination, we also stand with indigenous nations and defend their right to self-determination. I encourage people to also take a minute to reflect on this from where you are speaking as well. Today we have an excellent program, but I just want to briefly introduce the Venezuela Solidarity Network, which is now organizing the monthly online picket actions that for 3 years were co-organized by groups based here in Canada, including Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, Just Peace Advocates, and the Venezuela Peace Committee in Winnipeg. The Venezuela Solidarity Network is a new North America-based network of organizations and individuals working to defend Venezuela's sovereignty and self-determination against U.S. government-led sanctions and attacks. More info on how to join the network will be put in the chat in a minute. We want to thank our organizations that are part of the network, the Alberto Lovera Bolivarian Circle in New York City, the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, GC, the Alliance for Global Justice, Chicago Alba Solidarity, Code Pink, Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice Canada, Friends of the Congo, the International Action Center, Just Peace Advocates, the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle of Toronto, the Orinoco Tribune, Popular Resistance, the Sanctions Kill Campaign, Task Force on the Americas, Venezuela Analysis, and the Workers' World Party. And we encourage you to join as well. Today we have a conversation with Oscar Schemel, the Electoral Consultant and President of one of Venezuela's most credible polling firms, Hinterlaces. We'll discuss the electoral outcome and the broader context of public opinion within Venezuela society, including socioeconomic, political, and cultural elements that motivated the vote, trends in political participation, and popular communal organization. If you have questions, I encourage you to use the Q&A box as we go through the program, which will be moderated by William Camacaro, who I will turn the microphone over to now. William is a Venezuelan-American who is national co-coordinator at the Alliance for Global Justice. He's a co-founder of the Bolivarian Circle of New York, Alberto Lovera, and a senior analyst at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, COHA. William, the program is yours. And again, welcome everyone.
Okay, can you hear me, guys? Wonderful. Yes, I just want to basically thanks to everybody to be with us today. Gracias por estar con nosotros hoy.
Thank you for being with us
Quiero
today. And I'd like
también mencionar que también formo parte
to
del
also mention
Solidarity Network.
that I am part
Hemos estado
of
allí
the
desde el
Venezuela
principio.
Solidarity
Y
Network. We've been
hoy
there from the
tenemos el
start.
placer de contar con
Today
alguien
we have the
que es muy
pleasure
conocido por
to talk with
nosotros allá
someone that we know very
en
well
Estados Unidos. Porque todos
in the
cuando hay
United States,
elecciones
because
hay un
every time
proceso
there's an electoral
importante
process
ocurriendo en Venezuela.
that is
Queremos
important in
saber
Venezuela,
la
we
opinión
always want
de
to
Oscar
know
Schemel y qué
Oscar
ha leído,
Schemel's
qué había
opinion
encontrado en la estadística, en los números, y qué dicen los números sobre lo que va a
and what
ocurrir
the
y lo
numbers
que está
say
pasando
about
en
what's
Venezuela.
going to happen and what is
Eh,
happening in Venezuela.
Oscar, como ya
Oscar,
ha dicho Alison, es
as
comunicador
Alison
social,
said,
sociólogo, pero
he is
también es el
a
presidente de
sociologist, a
Hinterlaces.
social
Es conductor
communicator,
del
and also
programa de
president of
análisis
Interlaces.
situacional en
He's
Bodine,
also
también un programa muy escuchado y visto
head of a
allá en los
program
Estados
in
Unidos.
Loverain that
Y
is well listened to
Oscar
over
es un
there
hombre
in the
muy
United
preocupado
States.
por el
He's
proceso
a man
democrático
that is
que vive
very
Venezuela
concerned
y
and
por la
worried about
situación
the situation in Venezuela and
que vive el país. Entonces queremos
and
darle las gracias a Oscar
about
por estar
what's
con nosotros,
happening in the country.
por
We want to
acompañarnos
thank
hoy
him for being
y
with us
darle la
today,
palabra para que nos
and
dé
we want him we want
unos
to give him the
25
mic
minutos su opinión, 20
for
minutos, no sé cuánto tiempo
around
esté
20,
tomando,
25
sobre lo
minutes,
que está ocurriendo en este
whatever
momento
you
en
would like,
Venezuela,
and to
sobre
tell
la
us
situación
what
general del
is
país
happening in Venezuela,
y
the
que
general
después
situation
nos dé
here,
la posibilidad para que
and
algunos de los
later
compañeros
give us
interactúen
the
con él y le puedan
opportunity
hacer algunas preguntas.
for friends to ask
Oscar.
questions. Oscar?
Buenas tardes, buenas noches. No sé qué hora
Good
será por allá.
afternoon, good evening. I don't know what time it is where you are.
Quiero compartir, buenas noches,
I'd
como
like
dice.
to,
Quiero
good
compartir
evening,
con
as I
ustedes
said, I want to
algunos
share with you
elementos, algunos
some
factores, algunas
elements, some
circunstancias que creo
factors
que
and
nos van a ayudar a
circumstances that I
entender
think will
la
help us
complejidad
understand the
del proceso electoral
complexity
venezolano.
of the recent electoral process in Venezuela that were celebrated the last 28th of July. Venezuelan society is living through profound changes, very profound, dramatic, intense, which haven't happened before. I think this can allow us to understand the special circumstances under which these elections were held. How the rentier state is not working anymore. There's not enough income to answer the needs and the expectations of Venezuelans. The state, in large part, does not have the resources that it used to have before, and that helped it to give enthusiasm and hope to the Venezuelan people. The role of the state has changed and its relationship to Venezuelans. Today, 3 out of every 4 Venezuelans, 3 out of every 4 have the opinion that their economic and personal and family future depends more on their own effort than on what the government does. Given that the state cannot depend as much on the oil revenue, it cannot provide solutions. Therefore, what does the citizen go to? They go to themselves. They are the ones that make the future for Venezuela. This seems simple, but it expresses a change that is very profound in the national culture. And obviously, it decreases the possibilities for the state to convince and to mobilize Venezuelans. This is a circumstance that is profoundly impacting the popular national culture. Another element that I think that we need to highlight is that in these elections, there was an external factor that transformed these elections in the most unfair and unequal elections in all of our electoral trajectory. I'm referring to the establishment of about 1,000 unilateral coercive measures against the economy of Venezuela, and particularly impact the oil industry. Obviously, this diminishes the opportunities that the state has to implement it or administer in ways that will solve the most important problems of Venezuelans. Close to 1,000 measures against our economy, against our oil industry, economic sanctions, financial blockade, a deterioration of public services have affected dramatically the quality of life of Venezuelans and the quality of the Bolivarian administration. This is a very important element. This is coming from outside, from the US, and it intervened openly through these sanctions and blockade against our economy. As you know well, any change in the economic basis of society obviously determines changes on the cultural superstructure and emotional structure of the population. These changes brought about by the affectation of the oil revenue have had an impact, an enormous impact on the society, and it has reconfigured new linguistic repertoires and symbolic repertoires. Any change, remember, on the economic basis has a direct and profound effect on our emotional and cultural structure. Also, in the latest years, a set of campaigns through fifth generation tools, which is a permanent multi-dimensional war with no weapons or bombs, but that has the same destructive capacity, a fatal capacity. We're talking about a cognitive war, disinformation, fake news, the creation of neurosis campaigns to discredit revolutionary leaders, public persecution, paramilitarism, destabilization, violence, diplomatic pressures, attempts at assassination of the president. All of these factors that were present in this electoral campaign, all of these were present in the campaign. You know well that the processes of social destabilization use weapons of affecting the psyche and events that create anxiety and a feeling of lack of protection and rage in the population. The objective of these fifth generation wars, these psychological wars, is to generate neurotic answers also in the electoral framework. Let us not forget in any way the impact that social media has on the nature of human beings. The President Maduro participated in elections with the most unfair and unequal conditions of all of our contemporary electoral history. In this electoral process, the qualitative and quantitative studies by Hinterlaces identified two great blocks that polarized Venezuelan society during this electoral process. The first block, the first psychosocial block, was associated to an extremist vote that wanted to finish with everything. It didn't matter who the candidate was, nor the proposal, nor the electoral offer, nor their credentials. It didn't matter who or what was being proposed. Nothing mattered, which is what you would expect normally. The electorate looks at values, personalities, proposals. Here, the important thing was to get out of what part of the population felt generated the neurosis. The opposition had a slogan to simply vote. There wasn't an offer, there was not a proposal. What was there was merely a neurotic answer from the opposition. It didn't matter who it was, it could be anyone. That sector would vote for that candidate. I want to show some slides where we can see the percentages, which were very high, of Venezuelans that didn't know who the candidate was. Let's see the graph, the previous one. Further still, that one first, please. Take a look at this graph. 8 out of every 10 Venezuelans were not sufficiently informed. 8 out of every 10 were not aware of what the credentials, values, or proposals from the opposition were.
Sorry, Oscar. Excuse me, Oscar.
Disculpa.
Oscar. We can't see the graph currently. Have you shared your screen? Esto compart.
So once again, in this election, 2 psychosocial blocks participated. One associated with an extremist, neurotic group. It doesn't matter who the candidate is, what they're proposing. It doesn't matter the day after or the consequences of that electoral decision. On the other hand, there was a second block, psychosocial block, that opted more for the future, evaluated the proposals, solutions of the candidates. The looter was someone who proposed solutions, somebody who proposed reconciliation. In this second psychosocial block were hope and resilience. There was unhappiness, there was unease, but there is no neuroses, there is no rage. There is hope. The majority of Venezuelans feel that it is preferable that Maduro's government be proactive and efficient instead of having a government from the opposition. 7 of 10 Venezuelans do not trust that the opposition can resolve the problems, the economic problems of the country. Why not Maduro any longer in this neuroticized society, or in this society posed between neuroticism and hope? In this society in the middle of an electorate that, on the one hand, doesn't pretend to gain any benefits, but rather vote against, and another electorate that prefers to trust that Maduro's government would be more productive, more efficient. In the end, Venezuelan society doesn't want to change the model. If we really take a look at it, they don't want to change the model. If we look at the vision of the majority of Venezuelan society, of the majority of Venezuelans, in regards to the vision of the country and the society, the majority are in favor of this mixed economy with different types of proprietorship, with a role that's different of the state, a very important role given to entrepreneurship, one that proposes the union of Venezuelans, that strongly values the ideas of investment, production, and employment. The dominating ideas in Venezuelan society today are the ideas of Chavez. Today, the popular idea of society is closer to Chavez's vision than to the opposition's. What happened on election day? Why not Maduro? And before I go there, I wanted to say, previously our polls had shown an advantage between 6 and 8 or 9% in favor of Maduro. The date of the election at 12:30 p.m. Maduro had an advantage of 8 to 9%. But what happens on the day of the elections? 28th of July, we arrive with an improvement or an elevation of the perception of the economic situation. 56%. July of this year compared to July of last year, 56% considered that the economy was getting better. And that's had people feeling positively about the future of the economy of the country. During the first semester of this year, 2024, our study showed an important recovery in family incomes in Venezuelan society. And that's obviously helped ratify Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. So remember, in Venezuela, about 80% of Venezuelans, their main concern is the economy. And within the economy, the income. There is no more important topic than the income of Venezuelan families for them. The majority considers that Nicolás Maduro's government can be more efficient and productive faced with an adversary that does not have sufficient qualities to be able to make a proposal in the economic sector. Remember, the opposition in Venezuela takes advantage of this discontent. The Venezuelan opposition does not have a solid backing based on their credentials, their behavior, their closeness with the popular sectors, their presence on the streets, their proposals for society. They benefit fundamentally from discontent, from that neurotic vote in this case. 70% does not believe that the opposition government can solve the economic troubles of the country. More than 40% of voters were adults above the age of 40, 45. This sector is characterized by decisions that are more reflexive, more conservative. The opposition arrived to this electoral process very divided. There were about 10 candidates from the opposition. Only one was able to capitalize on the neurotic vote. And another important detail or fact is that the opposition does not have the capacity to mobilize its voters, leading them to the voting centers. And as I mentioned previously, the opposition was very divided, more than 8, 9 candidates. And even within the forces that backed Edmundo, the candidate Edmundo, they were still very divided. They did not campaign in favor of this candidate. Edmundo Gonzalez's campaign was just focused on one mantra: vote, vote, vote. No proposals, no slogans, no. They just asked people to vote. People who were voting were asked to vote. So they were expecting this neurotic vote to be cast in favor of Edmundo Gonzalez. This neurotic vote is also an unstable vote because it's profoundly emotional. So it's unstable and spontaneous. Surely, and this is what we saw in the electoral studies, this neurotic vote entered into dissonance, contradiction. They started to rethink their decisions and rethink the threat or the anguish that was provoked by the possibility that if the opposition won, social programs would be eliminated. And that period of violence and conflict would arrive once more, a period that had been overcome. Majority of Venezuelans want unity, peace, consensus, to be able to leave behind the problems that today face Venezuelans. Venezuelans reject conflict, confrontation as a majority. And even those who want to change want a peaceful change without violence, without confrontation. So without leadership, without proposals, disconnected from the expectations of the majority, the opposition, radical opposition, led by Edmundo Gonzalez, only had the neurotic vote. Now we understand that the elections were a tactical decision, and the objective for this radical opposition this underlying objective was to maintain the objective of a social explosion, an institutional break, an implosion of the Venezuelan state. Meaning, despite the participation in this electoral process, they maintained the strategy of implosion, destabilization, annihilation of Chavismo as the alternative. This is an incredible strength of Chavismo. Chavismo has become an emotional community, a political culture, a social identity. And despite the difficulty, it has resisted the possibility of changing that alternative. Remember, the opposition is not an alternative. They have no leadership. They have no proposals. They benefit from this neurotic vote, from this vote of punishment. And for Chavismo, this is key. It is possible to mobilize, convince, and persuade the majority of Venezuelans, because the dominating ideas, emotions, the vision of the country that's dominating is closer to the thesis of Chavismo than to that of the opposition. The huge concern is that the opposition is not able to govern because it doesn't have these ties that are emotional, social with the majority of people. It benefits from neuroses. It feeds off this neuroses. And as we said at the beginning, making the Venezuelan society neurotic has been a prolonged strategy as of more than 20 years ago. Not just economic sanctions, financial blockades, but also the unknown, the emotional destabilization, the neuroticism of the society. So we're going to give you some facts so we can better illustrate these circumstances. Amongst which this electoral process took place last 28th of Can you see it? Just let me know if you see it. Here are some important facts. In September, we
4% en septiembre,
54%
o sea,
in
después de las
September,
elecciones, 54% votaría por Nicolás Maduro. Es
only
un porcentaje muy
54%
similar
would
al
vote
que
for
obtuvo
Nicolás
realmente
Maduro, a
en las
percentage
pasadas
that was
elecciones
very
presidenciales.
similar
Veamos
to
otros
what he
datos.
obtained in the previous presidential elections. Let's see some other facts.
La mayoría, el 60% considera
The majority,
en septiembre,
60%,
60% que Maduro
stick-
fue reelecto por mayoría de votos y solo
they
33%
believe that Maduro
piensa que
was
hubo fraude
elected
electoral.
with votes. Only 30-something%
69%
believed there was
de
electoral
venezolanos
fraud.
prefieren que el presidente Maduro tome
69% of Venezuelans
medidas y resuelva los
prefer
problemas
Maduro
económicos del país
to
antes que venga un
resolve the
gobierno
economic
oficial.
problems in the country
Para la mayoría de
rather than
venezolanos
have an opposition
que no
government.
quieren
For the
romper con el
majority
modelo
of
y lo que
Venezuelans who
quieren
do
es que el
not want to
modelo
break with the
funcione,
model, they
funcione, sea
just
más
want the model
eficiente,
to
más
work,
efectivo
to
para
be
la
more
mayoría de los
efficient, to
venezolanos.
be more
Es
effective. For the
preferible
majority of
que continúe
Venezuelans,
Nicolás
they
Maduro
prefer
a
that
que venga un gobierno de
for Nicolás
oposición.
Maduro to stay instead of having an opposition government take power.
57% de los venezolanos reconoce que el presidente
57%
Maduro
of Venezuelans recognizes that
ha
President
sido
Maduro
perseverante en la convocatoria
has
a un diálogo
persevered.
nacional. Esto es muy importante porque hay fatiga electoral, hay
There
fatiga en el
is
país, hay
electoral
fatiga con
fatigue.
relación al conflicto y la
There's
violencia
fatigue in
porque
regards
no
to
ha
the
resuelto
conflict,
ningún problema.
to the violence,
Y
because problems
la
have not
mayoría
been
quiere
resolved.
líderes
The majority
que construyan consensos que favorezcan la unidad del país.
leaders wants leaders who favor unity in the
Ok.
country.
Estoy tratando de leer.
Perfecto, perfecto.
Pensando en la actual situación que vive
Thinking
Venezuela,
about the current situation that Venezuela
el
is going through,
83% se siente
83%
esperanzado
feels
en que los
hopeful
problemas del país
that the
se van a
problems in the
resolver y que la
country
situación va a
will be
mejorar.
resolved and that the situation will improve.
54%
54%
decían que votaría nuevamente por Nicolás
was
Maduro.
saying they would vote for Nicolas Maduro.
57% votaría por Nicolás Maduro
57% would
frente a
vote for
cualquier
Nicolas
otro
Maduro
candidato opositor. 60%
instead of
piensa que el
any
presidente
other
fue
opposition
reelecto por
candidate.
mayoría. La
60% believes that
mayoría
the president was
piensa, 63%
voted
específicamente
by
piensa
majority
que
into power again.
han
63% believes
solicitado
that
sanciones y
whoever has
bloqueos y
requested
congelamiento de los
sanctions and
recursos de
blockades
Venezuela en el exterior
and
deben ser
for
castigados.
resources
2
to
de
be
cada 3
frozen,
venezolanos. Y
2 out of 3
datos
Venezuelans
importantes
believe they
que
should
realizamos en la
be tried.
reciente encuesta que culminó hace una semana.
And in this
Le
recent
preguntamos a los
survey
venezolanos
that
qué
ended a
debería
week ago, we asked
hacerse
Venezuelans,
principalmente para lograr los
what
cambios
is
que
the main
necesita
thing
el
that
país.
should be done in order to achieve the
Protestar en la calle,
changes needed in the country?
2%.
Protest in the
2% opina
streets,
que para lograr los
2%.
cambios hay que salir a la
2%
calle a
believes
protestar.
that in order to enact change,
9%
they need to go out
opina
into the
que
street
hay
and
que, hay
protest.
que ir a votar
9%
en las elecciones.
believes you need to go to vote in elections.
37%
37%
que el gobierno debe ser más eficiente y
that
productivo.
the government needs to be more
37%. Y
efficient
vean este
and
dato
productive.
también, muy
37%.
singular,
And
muy
then look at
interesante.
this other really interesting
47%
factor here.
piensa que para lograr los cambios que
47%
necesita
believe
Venezuela,
that in order
los
to
venezolanos
achieve the
debemos
change
trabajar
that
cada
Venezuela
día más.
needs,
Estar
us Venezuelans, we
cada
need to
vez
work
más
every
presentes
day.
con los
We need
niveles
to
de
work more every
resiliencia
day. And this
e
goes perfectly
involucramiento
with
en la
this
agenda
idea of
pública que hoy sienten los
resilience
venezolanos.
and
Hoy la
involvement to the
mayoría de
public
los
agenda
venezolanos
that
piensa que su
Venezuelans
futuro
feel.
económico,
the majority of Venezuelans today feel that their economic future, both personal and from their family, depends on their personal efforts. And as you can observe, that reveals a new relationship between the state and the Venezuelan society, but also reveals something very interesting, that this new epic collective has been born when faced with blockades, with inefficiency, with corruption. For them, the way to escape this is that Venezuelans make more of an effort, commit to a better future for the country. This question's key. We did this for the poll in October that we recently finished. 69%, so 7 out of every 10 Venezuelans feels that the following 10th of January, when the president of the republic will be proclaimed at the National Assembly, 69% believe that will be President Nicolás Maduro. This is another important piece of data. 76%, so 3 out of every 4 Venezuelans in our most recent poll or survey in October, 3 out of every 4 Venezuelans feel that we need to close this electoral chapter. We need to close this chapter of political confrontation, and we need to dedicate ourselves to moving the country forward. Majority of Venezuelans are tired of the conflict, the violence, and simply are seeking reconciliation, union, and efficiency. I could even dare say that Venezuelans are thinking less in whom and more in what needs to be done. They are thinking less about the person who is going to occupy the role of president and more about what needs to be done, what actions need to be done. So with that, we finish and we begin this Q&A session. Maybe we could do a really brief summary. So the Venezuelan electoral problem goes further than just the elections. Venezuelan society is undergoing profound transformations. They are challenging current politicians and Chavismo to question the relationship they have with citizens, with Venezuelan society. We are in a true new phase of the Venezuelan revolution. I want to thank Oscar for that excellent talk. We want to see who we have here online and the questions that we have.
I'm going to call on Professor Fred Mills. Are you around? Can we open his mic? Professor Fred Mills. He's a philosophy professor from the University in Washington, D.C. He's friends with Enrique Lucel. And welcome, Fred. Thank you very much. And thank you, Oscar Schemel, for an excellent presentation. It was very informative. I wanted to say that this good news about 83% of Venezuelans feeling hope despite the difficulties. But also there's 33% that think that there was fraud, electoral fraud. How can we overcome this or decrease this percentage? What is the reason for this lack of trust by this 33%? Is it communication, campaigns? Does it have to do with discreditation campaigns? How can we overcome this distrust from the 33%? Yes, I would add to that a piece of data that reveals a lot. A large percentage of a third of the population of the country defines itself as Chavista. That's the historical basis of the opposition that have voted time and again against President Chavez then and now President Maduro. That I'm talking about two forces that are very strong and that from the perspective of quantitatively they seem very similar, but there's a political center that has been increasing and that shares more of the ideas of the Chavismo than of the opposition. I think that as long as Chavismo can feed off of that political center and keep its majority, electoral majority, the citizens that today place themselves on the side of the opposition could, if they don't change their opinions, at least they can be neutralized. They have had destabilization objectives, insurrection objectives for the last 20 years. So what's important is that the majority of Venezuelans today are closer to the ideas of Chavismo than the ideas of the opposition. I insist, the opposition has yet to have a leader, a vision for the country, a shared vision. They don't have any presence in social movements. They don't have social organizations. It's been an opposition that has historically profited from discontent and the punishment vote and neurosis. Yes, another question. This is very interesting. I think that that Chavista symbols are an integral part of the popular culture. In 2013, Capriles used Chavista symbols in their campaigns. Do you believe that is continuing, that even the opposition, in order to achieve votes, they need to use some of those symbols from Chavistas? Look, the opposition in this electoral campaign where Capriles was present, they tried to use some of the symbols. And what it tried to do was to achieve it not being perceived as a threat to the achievements of Chavistas. They wanted to disguise themselves as something that wasn't a threat to those social conquests. But in the end, people vote for the original. And in this circumstance, when Chavismo has become an emotional community, a social identity, Chavismo has the immense challenge. It's mandatory and it cannot be excused. It has to renew its repertoires, their symbols, their linguistic repertoire. There have been very deep changes in the Venezuelan society, and that's the great challenge for Chavistas. How do you get back to the closeness you had with the people? there is a large proportion of people that are disputing Chavista's power. So we need a new narrative that involves emotions. We're going to invite someone else to make a question, pose a question. Thank you, Fred. We now have Roger Harris. He's an activist, North American activist. He is in every struggle. He's a member of Task Force on the Americas.
Well, thank you, Oscar Schemel. That was
Gracias.
absolutely excellent presentation. I'll ask a very brief question, but I think there's some really good questions in the Q&A and also in the chat that we should try to get to as well. But if you look at the mainstream media in the Western press, which is what we're inundated, just today, this morning in Al Jazeera, there was an article that said Maduro only won 30% in the July 28th election. The inference was that 7 out of 10 people in Venezuela supported the opposition. That, of course, is just the opposite picture that you show. If the opposition really did have that type of support, what would you see in Venezuela? How would it look? And how can we explain to the international public that this is just the opposition is what we would call an astroturf opposition. It has a popularity in Washington, D.C., but not the game, not on the streets of Venezuela.
Look, around 14% say they self-define. It sometimes increases to 20%, but at least 14% of people self-define as opposition. Most of them define themselves as neither here nor there, but there's a 14% that defines itself as strong opposition. Of that, at least around 12% sympathizes with one particular party of the opposition. So take a look at the advantage that the opposition has to become a political alternative. It has empathy from the opposition. It's very small. The party that has the most support really has 3 or 4%, whereas the Socialist Party has up to 35% of positive of approval. It shows you the advantage that the Chavismo has in the face of an opposition that appears to be disconnected and having no values. Another important thing is that this can be explained maybe because of the social condition of the leaders of the opposition. They are people from the middle class and upper middle class and upper class. The latest come from the richest parts of Venezuelan society who have no existential connection to the actual Venezuelan society. They have had difficulties to understand the new country that was born in 1999. They found it very difficult. And I tell you this because I know them and we chat very frequently. They don't manage. And I think it's because of their social condition and because of a very limited presence in actual society in Venezuela. They don't have social organizations with any popular struggle fronts. all of that ample spectrum that can be constructed in society. They don't have that. There's discourse, there's symbols, there's slogans, their narrative are very disconnected. They have some electoral success, but that is based on discontent, and they don't have merits but in and of themselves. Let's give some space. Thank you, Roger, for the question. We have here Camila. I don't know if you're around, Camila. Camille. There's a question by Camille. I don't know if she's around. We also have.
I am around. Apologies. Did you mean Camille Landry?
I think so, Camille.
Okay, thank you. My question for our panelists is, can you compare and contrast the priorities of the revolutionary Venezuelan government to the priorities of either the opposition candidate or the priorities of a capitalist nation like the United States? How do your principles differ?
Capitalismo y socialismo.
The
Nosotros
confrontation
hicimos
between capitalism and
un estudio
socialism, we did a study,
y cualitativo.
a quantitative and qualitative study. Venezuelans, the majority of them, and I'm telling you that this is a shared vision for a bit more than 70% of the population. So this is a mixed economy. They're against expropriations, which were very talked about for some time. They're for a fundamental role of businessmen and women. Venezuelans have turned to the business sector because they consider it a tool that is important to overcome the crisis, but they also agree with a strong state that stops the abuse and the unmeasured revenues. I think in most of the topics, Venezuelans agree. I insist that the challenge of Chavistas is to connect with this vision. It's a new synthesis of socialism and capitalism. From the socialism, it takes the social help, and from capitalism, it takes its capacity to invest and create richness. The worry of Venezuelans now is income, and there are new words that have come into their linguistic repertoire. Before it was justice, sovereignty, independence, consensus. Today, it's investment, production, employment. Economy is the center of the preoccupations of the Venezuelan society. And in the face of capitalism, they want an effective, productive socialism, as our research shows. The majority of Venezuelans agree on most topics, both economic and political. We're in a new stage where polarization, the previous polarization from decades ago, has softened and achieved a synthesis of the models. And from that synthesis will come the new contradictions within the revolution that the revolution must face. Very well. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Camille. I think we have at least two more questions. We had Leo Flores. I saw him around, but I can't find him now. Yes. Leo wanted to say something, pose a question. We also have Maria from Canada. Let's start with Maria. No, we've got Leonardo now. He says his question is in the chat. We'll look for it then. Would you like to pose it yourself, Leo? You could do it by phone. It wouldn't be a problem. Okay. Well, then let's go with Maria. I don't know if Maria has access. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, Maria. She is a lecturer, a university lecturer, and she's talking to us from Canada. She's Venezuelan. Yes. From the Bolivarian circle Luis Riel. First of all, I want to thank you, Oscar Schemel, for his excellent presentation, which I've heard before, because I always follow what you say and the results of your research. I'm a sociologist, and I give it a lot of importance. I congratulate you and your team in Hinterlaces. I'd like to pose a question. Those of us that live here within the belly of the capitalist beast, we're always our attention is always piqued by very small things here that can change elections. For example, if a candidate thinks to say something, then they lose. Or if inflation rises just a little bit, they say that the government will fall because the inflation increased by 1 point. But we've seen all that Venezuela has gone through, all that it has received because of these sanctions, all of these violent acts, with this financial blockade. The miracle is that the government has not been overthrown. The miracle is that people continue to have hope. So I want to ask you, what do you think this resistance is based on, this miraculous, astonishing resistance? What is it based on? Because when they tell me that Maduro didn't win the elections, I always say, how is it possible that there's peace in Venezuela, that people aren't out throwing rocks? Life continues. And knowing that Venezuelans get out on the streets if they think something isn't right. We want peace in Venezuela because the majority, as you've said, they know how they voted. They voted for Maduro. But I ask once again, what do you think is the basis of that resistance, which is incredible, historic, unedited, in a country like Venezuela, people like Venezuela, that has been hurt once and again in 20 years, and it stays there?
Has been very difficult for Venezuelans. They've received a coup d'etat, violence, general strike that's 3 months long, looting, economic sanctions, one that is leading to the destruction of the emotional stability of Venezuelans. neurosis, instability. And this, the majority of Venezuelans have resisted it, have faced it. So it's difficult how a government that's under so much pressure has suffered through so much aggression, so much bombing, because in their arsenal, they don't have bombs. In this country, we eat yuca, green mango, and sardines we've eaten for months. An incredible scarcity provoked by these unilateral forces. And even so, the majority of the country maintained stability, calm. But there wasn't a social explosion or a break in the Venezuelan state. That alliance between the armed forces and the civil power continued. And that has a little bit to do with our own nature as Venezuelans, where a conduct has arisen as the leaders of independence against Spain. This has been a president that is shown solidarity, patience, formed under the discourse of President Chavez. So this not only changed the material base, it also changed the political culture, the common sense, the fundamental values. What Comandante Chavez was always saying, and now President Maduro, although I insist that it is time to renew this new symbol, grammatical narrative symbol, because there's a new reality. As was said, when we knew all the answers, they changed the question. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Maria. Oscar, look, we've got tons of questions. I can see. Listen, there's someone here that's asking was there any polling company who was bold enough to say that Gonzalez won? Well, data analysis never forecasted for Gonzalez. And I mentioned because it's worthy of respect. All polling places are worthy of respect. Well, I don't speak of them. I don't speak either bad or good. They're competitors, but I don't know what they deserve. I remember that the president of data analysis declared that we could be surprised, that they weren't sure of who would have the victory. And data analysis said that President Maduro could win. We forecasted it with an even smaller margin than the one that ended up occurring, about 6 points. And the exit poll from Sunday, election day, gave Maduro an advantage of about 9 points, if I remember correctly. Here we have a question. How is the government affected by what occurred in BRIC? And we have a bunch of other questions, but I think we can stop here. We can send you these questions through text message. And if you answer any of them, then we can send them to everyone who was here today with us. We want to thank you for being here with us today, and for our friends in the US who've also accompanied us during all these years of this struggle. And I want to leave you the space so that you
Muchas
can
gracias a todos
say goodbye
por
to
atención, por
the
recibirme, por
colleagues who are
escucharme.
over there. Thank you so much for
Sé que
your
me van a
attention,
aportar ideas,
for listening to me.
reflexiones, un poco
We
de
try
inteligencia
to
para
give some
entender mejor
ideas, have
este
some
proceso
reflections,
político
some
social que ha
intelligence
vivido la
to better
sociedad venezolana,
understand
que ha sido
this
muy complejo
social,
y que
political
puede
process that has divided
obligatorio,
Venezuelan society, and that
obligatorio,
is
urgente,
obligatory, is
repensar y estudiar a
urgent
fondo, porque de aquí
to
pueden salir muchas
rethink, to
enseñanzas para los
study
procesos de cambio
profoundly,
que la
because
humanidad entera.
it could
Muchas
be
gracias por
changes
su
that
atención.
affect all of humanity. So thank you so much for your attention. I also want to thank Lalo,
Un
who
aplauso
is
para
located
Lalo,
in
está ayudando
Tucson.
con la
So an applause for Lalo, who is
tecnología.
helping us with
Doña
technology.
Natalia, que se encuentra
Also,
en Texas,
Natalia,
que
who is
nos
located
está
in
ayudando también con el
Texas,
Zoom call.
who is also helping us
Muchísimas
with this
gracias, Natalia.
Zoom call. Thank you so much,
También quiero
Natalia.
agradecer a Alison
I also want to thank
por estar
Alison
con nosotros desde
for
Vancouver.
being with us from
Poquito lejos.
Vancouver, a little bit far.
Y bien, nos vamos a
And
despedir
we are going to go ahead and say
con una foto,
goodbye
¿no, Alison?
through a photograph,
Picket,
right,
del
Alison?
Tiger Group.
Yeah, and I have a few announcements if that's okay. Really,
Okay, go ahead.
a big thank you to Oscar for answering our questions, which can range many topics. We have participants from across the United States and actually around the world, including Australia, with us here today. So we all have varied perspectives, and you've given us the scientific data to help in our thinking and our explanations to people as we build solidarity. So thank you so much. I wanted to share a few links as we get ready to close because the Venezuela Solidarity Network is continuing this work beyond our next webinars, which I will announce, but we also have put together, and many folks were very instrumental in this, an elections toolkit that I hope people will find useful. The elections toolkit includes links to many different resources and articles, especially about the election in Venezuela, and is a great resource for continuing our analysis about the presidential election, which, as I can tell from the questions, is still something that we will continue discussing up to that, of course, very critical moment when President Nicolas Maduro is inaugurated in January that we are all watching carefully for. So in the second, there'll be a link in the chat to the elections tool. Natalia's just put it there. Thank you, Natalia. Then we also have a sign-on letter against U.S. intervention in Venezuela that we're supporting from the Alliance for Global Justice against coup in Venezuela. This is a letter that was started during the presidential election when the United States very clearly tried to drum up an attempted coup against the government through violence that we've talked about in previous webinars. And so there's a link in the chat to sign and share that sign-on letter from the Alliance for Global Justice. Our next webinar, which I hope everyone can help us build and join for, is called Why We Stand with Venezuela. And it's going to be a conversation with Venezuela Analysis on an article recently published by Ricardo Vaz and Lucas Corner of Venezuela Analysis called A Critique of Whitewashing the Imperialist Siege on Venezuela. And this conversation will bring up important questions about anti-imperialism and why it is necessary to support Venezuela and offer a critique of those who are not standing with Venezuela at this time. So I think it's going to be a really excellent conversation, and that will be on Tuesday, November 26th at 4 p.m. Pacific and 7 p.m. Eastern time here in North America. And the link to register for that will also be in the chat shortly and out on our email list and website as well, which again is VenezuelaSolidarityNetwork.org. I also wanted to take a second to share about a webinar taking place on October 29th. Now, this webinar is organized by the Democratic Socialists of America International Committee, so the DSA International Committee, and is a webinar to discuss Venezuela and Palestine, which is important, and the historic solidarity between Venezuela and Palestine. It's with Diego Sequeda of Misión Verdad website and historian Alexander Aviña, and it's October 29th at 9 p.m. Eastern, and there will be a registration for that in the chat as well, and you can find the information to register there at the DSA International Committee website. So yes, from here in Vancouver, Canada, yeah, those are the announcements. And as has been traditional in our monthly pickets over the last many years, 3 years, if folks would like, you can turn on your camera and join a group photo where we can all just kind of see each other, say hello, express our solidarity with Venezuela around their consistent work to defend not only themselves against imperialist interventions and sanctions, but also stand with oppressed people around the world, including, if folks have had the chance, the very powerful words of President Nicolas Maduro at the recent BRICS summit in solidarity with Palestine are well worth a listen to. I encourage you to join our next webinar and continue this work, and to accept the invitation if you got it on your screen that says promote to panelist. And William, if you're there, do you have any closing remarks for today? I think he's maybe not here. Just folks should be able to turn on their cameras, perhaps. If you'd like to join our group photo, raise your hand.
Okay. One moment, Alison.
Sí, claro.
Give me 1 second.
Of course. So if you're unable to turn on your camera, we might have to change a setting, which I'm not sure if we can do, if we can enable everyone to kind of be able to turn on their cameras, Lalo, but let us know. I'll take this opportunity to also thank the translators, the interpreters for tonight, who've done a difficult job, especially with numbers and data. It is not an easy task. And so I really want to thank Grace and Giselle for offering interpretation tonight. The recording of this webinar in its original language is available immediately on Facebook, but it will be available on YouTube shortly. So we really appreciate the interpretation that is offered, because it helps people participate not only today, but also be able to listen in either language on any day. So if people are able to turn on your camera, you'll have to probably activate your camera. We're seeing the video disabled by the host. So unless we can change that, we might actually miss out on our picture, but you can see us all. All right. Yeah, I can't turn on the camera. Okay. Well, we will work on that for next time. We miss seeing you all, but I know that you will continue.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay, perfect. Try again, everyone, if you've got the patience. I'm just putting in the chat again the link to join the next Venezuela Solidarity Network monthly online picket and webinar with Venezuela Analysis. Don't know if it made it there earlier. I was having copy and paste issues. We see you. So if anyone hasn't received an invitation to join the group photo, then raise your hand electronically and I will be happy to promote you. Otherwise, we'll take our photo. Camille, okay. Fantastic. Let's all say together, hands off Venezuela.
Hands off
Hands off
Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Hands off Venezuela.
Venezuela.
And a big thank you to William, to the Alliance for Global Justice team, to everyone who posed a question, and especially to Oscar from Hinterlaces, and encouragement to people to follow the work of Hinterlaces. We'll see you again.
Okay,
Hey, what was the
bye
point of
bye,
us
guys.
joining if we couldn't get our questions asked?
Sorry,
Time for everyone's questions.
Davey,
That's all right.
You know, I had
so many
good,
Davies.
Hey, William.
I know I had good ones, especially if it is true that the Venezuela want to become a social democracy.
These are big questions. We'll work on that, Jeffrey, and giving a forum to talk about it. Thanks for
Thank you
coming.
very much, guys.
Just trying to figure out the root cause of this, why U.S. is doing this to Venezuela, so we can end it once and for all. Because you want to solve a problem, always get to the root of it, not the surface.
Oil and gold.
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.